what was that? There's a moment for me in my life that I decided, you know what? I want to write books. I want to tell a story. For you, what was that one incident or that one moment that you said, you know what? I, David Lee Summers, want to write books?
You know,
Or was there a bunch of different things?
it was a bunch of different things, but what I really remember is when I was really young. I must have been like 8 or 9 years old or so. And, you know, as a kid, I was a big fan of Star Trek. And, you know, I would watch it like every single afternoon. And, you know, it's like, you know, when you're that young, you're kind of just getting conscious that these are actors putting on a play, you know, that someone's written. And the beauty of Star Trek is you had, you know, each episode begins right with big letters in the credits, written by. And I started discovering these people with written by had books in my library. You know, people like, you know, Harlan Ellison, oh gosh, Theodore Sturgeon, and you know, and David Gerald. You know, it's like I could go to my library and check out other stories by these guys. And right around that time was when David Gerald actually came out with his book, The Trouble with Tribbles, which was his story of how he wrote the episode for the series, where he came up with the idea, how he developed it, you know, and actually gave you some snippets of drafts on the way to actually creating, you know, what ultimately would become one of the most iconic episodes of the series. And I thought, wow, being a writer is something you can do professionally. And, you know, that was maybe the moment when I really got set on the path of, you know, this is something I would really like to work towards doing. And, you know, the very first time I really sat there and said, you know, maybe I've got an idea for a book. This comes a little later when I was in high school, and I was with one of my high school buddies, and we said, you know, we saw, you know, this was the time when the Star Trek novels were really coming out, you know, like one a month from pocketbooks, and in some ways I think Simon and Schuster still is almost that kind of rate. You know, and we were just devouring these things at that time, and we said, you know, I bet we could write one of these, and you know, we just laid in, and you know, we came up with our story, and that's, you know, my first unpublished novel was a Star Trek novel that I wrote back then. But it kind of, you know, and I look back at it and I see all the, you know, every single amateur mistake you could make in that very first book. But it was the thing that got me over the hump that, you know, gee, I could actually write. And, you know, and then, you know, to take that one step further, my friend and I went to an assembly at his high school. We actually went to two different high schools in the same town and knew each other through church. And but Ray Bradbury came to speak, and so you know, we were, you know, he went and picked me up, and we were walking on campus, and you know, we're caught by the principal, and you know, my first thought was busted. You know, I'm from another school. You know, I don't have an official permission slip, and she, you know, I had my tape recorder with me. And, you know, maybe my teacher called ahead. That's the one thing I kind of think might have happened in the background that I didn't necessarily know about at the time. But she says, "Are you reporters from other high schools?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, Mr. Bradbury's eating lunch in the library right now. Would you like to join him?" You know, here I am, 16 years old, and I get to go basically sit down and have lunch with Ray Bradbury and, you know, two or three other teachers. And, you know, I sat there in awestruck silence
Oh yeah.
for most of that. And, you know, I did get up the courage to ask him a question in the assembly, but afterwards he said, you know, I'm getting together with a few of the teachers. You know, we went up to him to ask, you know, just to say thanks for, you know, letting us spend time with you. It was great to meet you. and get a couple of the books signed. And he said, you know, we're getting together with a couple of the teachers after this. Would you like to come out with us? And he told us where they were meeting. And so we came out, and that was actually when I got a chance to talk to him. And during that, you know, I was telling him, you know, I was working on short stories, you know, the two of us were working on a book together. And he looked at me and said, are you submitting your stories? And I said, well, not yet. I'm not sure if I'm quite to that level. And he looked at me and he pointed at me and he said, send your stuff to a magazine now. It's like, okay, you have faith in me. And, you know, so years later, and this is the epilogue of that part of the story, was, you know, when I did actually get my first official SFWA pro rate sale to Realms of Fantasy magazine, I sent a copy of it off to Ray Bradbury with a thank you for prodding me. And he sent me back just this lovely letter saying, you know, I'm proud of you, you know, how, you know, what great work you've done. And it's a fine story. And, you know, how do you?
Wow. That's amazing.
Yes. So
that would motivate me too.
So whenever I start feeling down about the whole business, you know, that letter sits in my file cabinet because I don't want it to get sunstruck or anything. But, you know, you know, it's the thing I take out and remind myself that, you know, there are times in all of this that's worth it. So
definitely.